Kate Winkler Dawson.
And I'm Paul Holes.
This is Buried Bones.
Hey, Kate, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Paul. I wonder if there's anything different about me that you're noticing.
Well, your hair is different.
Very good. Very good. What's different about it, do you think?
Well, you've got it brushed back.
Okay, hold on. I'll make it clear. Mm-hmm.
Is it shorter? Is it curly? It's the curls.
Curly. It'll flop forward like it always does in the video part. It always kind of like, I have the best intentions of it being back. And then as I'm looking around, it always flops forward. Yes, I am a girl with curls and I straighten my hair on special occasions, i.e. buried bones and some book events. But I am definitely naturally curly, like one of my kids is. So I would like to say officially, I wanted to try something new, different look, just see, spice things up. Unofficially, I didn't feel like straightening my hair.
Okay. So this is you just natural Kate today, right?
I did some stuff, but normally I haven't. I've got my glasses on normally. I have a ponytail going, so this is a little different. So we'll have to see. I don't want to take a poll or anything, but I might go back and forth unless there's like a mass objection trend that happens, which I don't think it will.
No, you look great.
Thank you. And I also want my kid to know, the one who has she has gorgeous, long, curly hair. I want her to know that, I don't always, when I go fancy, sometimes the curls are the way to go,
Okay. Yeah, I like it.
Is this the same haircut you've always had? High school, everything. And don't joke about your thinning hair. Your hair is fine. I know men are sensitive. But have you ever changed up your look very much?
No, it's definitely different than when I was in high school. Back in the 80s, kind of the feathered back hairstyle for, the guys was in. And so I had to part it down the middle and feathered back. And I also had a mustache in throughout high school, which when I look back at my yearbook photos, I was like, what the hell were you thinking, Paul? But, it is what it is. And then when I went to the police academy in 1994, I was working in law enforcement. And though I could have worn my hair differently, pretty much it was always just short. I changed it. You talk about the thinning hair. At one point when I noticed my hair was thinning, I decided, I'll just do the shave it bro. Yeah, and I did a really close buzz cut. And I remember coming home and my wife and my oldest daughter, they both looked at me. They saw my haircut, and in essence, they both started to dry heave because I looked horrible. I'm not one of those guys that can be bald and look good, unfortunately.
They started to dry heave.
Yeah, but right now, my hair is probably the longest it's been in a quarter century, to be frank.
Really?
I'm growing it out a little bit, and that way I can, next time I get it cut, I'll give the barber some options. Maybe I'll change my look up. Maybe I'll shave it off. Stay tuned.
You should talk to your wife and your daughter before you do anything, clearly. to avoid any trauma. Alexis, our producer, is a tiny bit evil, and she thinks we both need to give her our high school photos for social media.
Which high school? Like the senior yearbook photo, or
the
just
feather back?
The feather back.
Yes, the Miami Vice, I think, is probably what it is.
Oh, well, it's like there's a photo of me when I was playing football, and so it was the group photo, and somebody zoomed in on it and kind of shared that. All those photos in yearbooks are now pretty much available online. It's amazing.
So I hope everybody hears and sees what he's saying here. He does not want it. If you want to dig around, like I talk about autopsy photos on social media, I am against, for me, putting anything up involving a dead body. Normally, this is the way that Paul is approaching, I think, his high school photos is, if you want to find them, go ahead, but I'm not going to give them
I've got my
to you.
yearbooks right across the room from me. I can, scan something and get it to Alexis if that's what she's asking for. I don't have a problem with that.
We pretty much always do what Alexis asks us to do. So I think we have to do that.
We don't have a choice.
Listen, I was not always at my best in high school either. And I can't remember. I have a bunch of my friends. I have a group of 7 girlfriends who are my best friends from a couple of them, Tina and Angie, starting from middle school. So for a gazillion years. And we always look at high school yearbook stuff and make fun of ourselves. So I'm not always at my best in high school, but the whole point is that in high school, I wore my hair down. I never wore it as a ponytail. And I don't know when I started, probably the mom thing, when I was just like, I'm either going to tear my hair out or I have to put it in a ponytail.
Yeah, keep it easy, right?
Yeah. So we'll see how this goes. I mean, don't be surprised if I go back to my normal straightened hair because I do wear it curly so often, but I like to change stuff up and, all of that. So there you go.
Well, I'll stay on top of you. How's that?
Okay. That's I think the key ingredient to any relationship is you're always kind of throwing curveballs at your person, kind of like, well, what do you think about this? So,
keep it exciting, right?
Keep it exciting. Talking about keeping it exciting, that's where we're going. This is the furthest back we've been, I would have to say, in quite a while. We're in Civil War era. And so this is going to feel different and different than what we're normally doing, but I find it really interesting, and I have a lot of points that I want to ask you about when we talk about this story, which as it unfolds, real history geeks might recognize, where we're going with this. So we will see what you think.
That sounds good.
Okay, let's set the scene. Get ready for a history lesson, Mr. Paul Holes.
I'm game.
I've never written about Texas in a book before. And I don't know if it's because I live here, but there's that, that feeling for me of, I'm not that much into the Western stuff. I tend to gravitate towards New England and sometimes the West Coast. But, I really am interested in this region, this area, and history. And we are actually going to be in your state. We're going to Colorado.
Oh, okay. I wasn't expecting that. I thought we were going to be doing something in Texas.
Well, it's kind of Westerny, so we'll see how it goes. And like I said, I'm normally not into sort of Westerny type stories, but I was really interested in this one. So it's actually not even Colorado, the state yet. It's Colorado territory. And do you know much about Colorado history, just as far as establishing borders and all of that kind of stuff? Who was there before?
No, I don't think I know anything. I actually know Texas better because I had to, I did 7th grade in Texas. And at least at the time I went to school, 7th grade, you had to go through Texas history.
History, that's right. Yeah. Woo. And what a history. Okay. Let's start with, we're going to Colorado and we are in March of 1863, smack in the middle of the Civil War. The Civil War doesn't have anything to do with it, but, you have to think about how much the country's expanding at this point. There's the war is happening. There are people divided in not only, states and cities and families really, over, who they should side with. So in Colorado territory, officially it's Union, but very, very, very divided. And I think part of that has to do with the history. So I tried to really streamline this. Allie did a great job. One of our researchers, Allie, did a great job giving me a ton of history. And I wanted to streamline it because I just thought you were just going to jump off a bridge or something if I kept going. It's like 3 pages of history, which I adore. So we're in Colorado territory, but 20 years earlier, it had been part of Mexico. Okay. So we get Colorado and it becomes part of America. Then it becomes New Mexico. Now it's Colorado. And Allie had an interesting little aside about why they drew the boundaries and made sort of a different shape for Colorado. It's mostly aesthetic. So it's because you could have the kind of the rectangular square or rectangle like shape of Colorado. So they redrew the boundaries. Regardless we are in now Colorado territory. So we're in the southernmost portion, which is called the San Luis Valley. And like I said, there's a lot of tension there because of the war happening. So in the southernmost part of Colorado, San Luis Valley, are you familiar with that area at all? I don't know Colorado very well as far as geography goes.
Yeah, I'm fairly sure that probably on my way out to Telluride, I went down south and then went west to get out to Telluride. And San Luis Valley sounds familiar. It's either that or one I had consulted with Wichita, Texas authorities and had driven back from Wichita Falls and came up through New Mexico and then the southeast part of Colorado. And so maybe that's also what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, it might be. I haven't been in that area either. My wonderful sister-in-law lives in Denver, or outside of Denver. And so, I mean, my experience with Colorado, honestly, is pretty much confined to Denver, a little bit of skiing. And then I went to, Colorado City, I think is where I went to. So, the people who live in the Colorado Territory, this area, used to be Mexican citizens because it was with Mexico 20 years earlier, then it became New Mexico. So when the property ownership happened with Mexico, you have all of these people who have, different plots of land. That's the ownership. These plots of land go back for generations. When the area becomes New Mexico, then, there's no deeds or paperwork really to back it up. And it doesn't seem to matter because culturally, New Mexico is really aligned with the people of Mexico. So there were no problems. You see where I'm heading here. There's a lot of discontent when we have a new population come in. So before this new population comes in, the residents mostly live in what's called plazas. These are small adobe villages that house a couple of different families. When this part of the area, the southern part of the area of what is now Colorado, becomes a part of the territory. So, New Mexico gives it up, or it's taken from New Mexico and it's made into this new boundary. This happens in 1860. So there had been a gold rush, which I probably know. I always think about the California gold rush, but this is the Colorado gold rush. Do you know much about that?
Well, I wouldn't say I know a lot about the history of the gold rush, but one of the areas that I go with my Jeep, because I live on the side of Cheyenne Mountain, and within 10 minutes, I can be on the backside of that mountain. And there is a road, old stage road, that snakes its way through the mountains out to Cripple Creek, which is where there's this huge mine. And this road used to be railroad. And I believe it was for the metals that were being mined out of that mine, and some of that I believe was gold, or at least there was, one of the roads out there is Gold Camp Road. So I'm sure gold was being mined out just on the other side of the mountain from where I live.
Yeah. I mean, and I, like I said, did not know that there was a big gold rush in Colorado. There were an awful lot of white settlers flooding the area. Now we're going to have problems in that part of the territory. You have people who were Mexican residents who are now residents of Colorado, and you have white settlers coming and taking away land. And so there's one of the conflicts. And the other thing is then they're saying these people who are in this territory, they have not moved. It's the boundary that's moved. When they were in New Mexico, everybody left them alone. When they became in a part of the Colorado territory, it was much more inclined culturally towards the white settlers. And so this is where they're not getting any protection. And this is where we're having some issues. And all of this is, part of this story. So are you following me? Are you?
I'm following you. Yeah.
All right.
I'm just, I'm starting to key in on, motives for crime. So
now, what is this? This is, for me, I would call this historical context, right? But as an investigator, it's not victimology. What would this be called where you need to know, is this a high crime area? Or there was a riot here, 2 years ago and it might be pertinent. Is there a phrase for that?
Well, there is a discipline that's environmental criminology. Mm-hmm. And this is how the environment and possibly even the social economic aspects within that environment influence criminality. And so now when you start talking about, this Colorado territory, you're having different people coming in, and the actual, the occupants that have been there had a certain lifestyle, and now that lifestyle is being influenced, and there's going to be conflict that is developing, and some of that conflict is developing over the environment and what's within the environment, what's within the geography in the area. Now, this is with what you're talking about, is on a much bigger scale. Typically, when I'm going into a town or a city and I'm looking at a case, I'm wanting to know about, okay, what is this neighborhood like? Especially if it was 40 years ago on a cold case, what was it like then? And so that's where I'm starting to take a look at what the environment was in which the crime occurred.
Okay. So we know the environment, it's tension filled, and there are an awful lot of former Mexican citizens who are saying our land is being taken by white settlers, and they're not getting kind of any backup from anybody who's in leadership with the Colorado territory. So here's where we begin. We'll talk about several things, and you're going to ask details, and I probably am not going to have the details, but we'll see kind of how this unfolds. Just be very understanding if I can't answer some of your questions, and know we're definitely going in a particular direction. Okay.
Okay.
Could I be any more cryptic? Do you want me to be more cryptic than that? That's pretty cryptic.
I'm so used to it now, Kate. I just roll with the punches.
But this is going to happen, but it might not happen. But we'll see. I'll let you know in 30 minutes if it's going to happen. I know. That would drive me crazy. Okay. So this is March 18th, 1863. And there's a guy named Franklin William Bruce. And he has a house that is near Canyon City. And he owns a sawmill. So then now I might lean on you on some history here. You know Canyon City or no?
Yeah, Canyon City is just a 30-minute drive south from Colorado Springs. So I've been through it multiple times. Now, I don't know anything about Canyon City. What's from my past or my perspective with, the law enforcement is right outside of Canyon City is where you have this federal maximum security facility in Florence. And this is where the most notorious of notorious criminals like the Unabomber is kept, or El Chapo, the cartel. I think he was a cartel leader that they caught. So this is a very notorious facility in the United States.
Wow. Well, it sounds like Canyon City in the 1860s, of course, like much of the territory would have been farmland, and now we have these sawmills. Okay. So Franklin is leaving Canyon City to go to the sawmill that he owns, which is about 12 miles away. So he gets on a horse-drawn wagon. We're in that era, the horse-drawn wagon era. There's no trains. Well, in this area, we're not dealing with trains, but that's where you are, horseback or horse-drawn wagon. Franklin had moved to Colorado from Wisconsin about 3 years earlier when a lot of other people came for the gold rush. He was a prospector, and now he's pivoted to farming and selling lumber from his sawmill. He's in his 50s, and he has a wife named Ruth and 4 children. And there are a couple of kids who are old enough to work in the sawmill. I will say, boy, that could be almost any age. If they could hold a piece of wood, that would have been a kid who could work in a sawmill. So child labor laws and everything else. We don't have a great idea of the range of the ages of these kids, but it doesn't come too much into play. Okay. So Franklin's log cabin is 12 miles away. He gets on the horse and wagon and goes. Sometime later that day, the horses come back to the house, pulling an empty wagon. So I know that this is a kind of a question sort of out of left field, but how do they know? I mean, how do they know not to stay? Are they looking for food? What is happening? 12 miles? That's a long way.
Well, I think some of our listeners probably have expertise with horses. I think it's always amazing, these types of stories like, family dog goes missing, and then, they move, and, years later, the dog all of a sudden shows up at the new location. How do these animals do that? So I think, it's interesting with the horses. Obviously it's like, well, where's Franklin Bruce? What happened? Why aren't these horses tied up at the sawmill? So sounds like something bad happened to Franklin en route to the sawmill. Yeah. But again, the horse is coming back. That's fascinating. I mean, I can't explain it. It's just, it's really cool.
Yeah, it is. But alarming to Franklin's family, of course. So the newspapers of the time say that his youngest son decided to go up, I'm assuming on the horse and cart, to go figure out what happened to his dad. He's referred to in the 1860s, early 1900s in these articles as a young boy, which to me could be pretty young because, they probably would not have said a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old working on a farm in a sawmill is a young boy. That would have been a young man. Okay. So he could have been an 8-year-old. I don't know why he went. I don't know where the older kids were, but he went and he came back and said, Dad looks dead. So he had been shot through the heart. Okay. He was carrying a handgun. I don't know what kind, but it's still in its holster. And there are just conflicting. I promise we're going to get better accounts as we move through this, but there's conflicting accounts about whether he was found inside the sawmill, or if he had been outside the sawmill near where his horse had been grazing. But I think what's certain is that he had been shot once, and there is an account in several of the newspapers that a cross had been carved into his chest.
Oh.
So whether that's true or not, I know kind of a little bit of what you're going to say, but kind of just give us some clarity. I don't know if that falls under ritualistic or what that means just yet.
Do we know anything more about the cross? Is this like a Christian cross? Is this, something different than what I'm envisioning? Do you have any details on that?
I think it is your standard cross.
Just a cross. Okay.
Yep.
Which, obviously there might be religious connotations related to the cross that the offender is conveying. Mm-hmm. There also potentially could just be, how crosses, I'm thinking about Arlington National Cemetery, how crosses are used to basically mark the location of the deceased. And was that just, where the offender is coming up and is just, in essence, yep, I've killed this guy and here he is. Mm-hmm. So right now I couldn't really draw any conclusions as to what the offender is thinking about the significance of the cross. Mm-hmm. However, the offender is sending a message because Franklin Bruce is dead. He's not doing this to send a message to Franklin Bruce. He's sending a message to somebody who's going to either find the body or to some other entities, group of people, in which now it's like, what's going on with Franklin Bruce? Is this, is he being specifically targeted, or is this more of he just happened to be a victim of opportunity and the offender or offenders killed him? And it's like, you send anybody else down this direction, you're going to, suffer the same fate or something to that effect.
And I had wondered if it was to benefit Franklin somehow. I don't know what that would mean. Putting a cross on him that
like maybe a spiritual thing, just
something. I mean, that seems not very kind, but I mean, of course they couldn't really tell, or I don't have notes that say whether this happened before or after he was shot. I imagine after, of course, but
yeah, I wouldn't argue against that thought. This is where, the offender may be killing Franklin in this world in order to deal with whatever's going on in, this world aspect, but is conscious of Franklin's spirit and wants to ensure that the spirit is moving on in whatever the religious philosophy the offender had.
One of the things that I know this is going to be disconcerting, but we have to move on from this story because this will be a series of things. And so, this is not something where we need to examine Franklin's inner circle, I promise. So we've got to go next to another group of people. Is that okay? Or does that make you feel very uncomfortable?
Again, I'll just roll with it, Kate.
Sorry. That's what I wish everybody said that to me. Okay, Kate, we'll do what you say, but let's just.
So when you say a series of things, do we have like a serial killer on the loose?
We'll see. We'll see. Now I'll be even more cryptic. Okay. The next night, so March 19th, 1863, this is near Colorado City, Colorado. There are a couple of men who are building a new sawmill, and there's a cabin. There's a little cabin nearby that they're sleeping in, so that they can get the sawmill done. They notice that the cabin is dark. So this is just a temporary home for them until they're done. And the reason they're alarmed that it's dark is because one of the cabin mates, one of the workers, who's a guy named Henry Harkins, is supposed to be making them dinner. And when it gets dark, and every night when it's gotten dark, and the two of the men are still working on the sawmill, they could see through the cracks of the logs, the lamplight. And so this night, there's no lights through the cracks of the logs. So I guess they're facing a non-window. They might not have a window at all in here, but I thought that was really interesting. I mean, we've talked about laundry hanging up, as a sign that, oh, this woman would never have done this because it rained last night. All of these signals of alarm. And these guys were alarmed because the light was out when Henry was supposed to be cooking dinner for everyone.
Yeah. So now they must go explore this, right? Where's Henry? What's up with Henry? Because they're hungry. they want their food, right?
They're hungry and irritated. Maybe he fell asleep. So as they approach the darkened cabin, they realize that Henry has been attacked. So it's not certain whether he's inside or outside the cabin, but what we do know is that he's been shot in the forehead. The men think with a revolver, but I don't know whether they retrieved a bullet or not. And then they said that he was also attacked with an axe. So there's a pertinent piece of information, and then there's sort of, what the men say Henry's body was in a state of. The pertinent part of information is that this is a group of men who came with Franklin and his family to be prospectors. So they knew each other.
Okay.
But they're quite a bit apart. I mean, they live kind of in the same little region, but they are miles and miles and miles apart where they might not ever see each other.
Right. No, I had to look up where Colorado City is, because here in Colorado Springs, there's old Colorado City. And I was like, is this, in the Springs? But I believe where you're talking about, it looks like it's about 30 miles south of Pueblo, which is about 30 miles south of Colorado Springs. And then I can see it's really south of Canyon City by about a good 30 miles, maybe, so I could, back in the day, that would be a pretty significant distance to have to cover for these groups that know each other to see each other. Right. And I mean, there's horseback and carts and everything, but you're right. Okay, let me tell you about Henry and what happens. I told you that he had been shot through the forehead. So Franklin had been shot through the heart. There is a large gash in Henry's head from an axe, they presume, this is graphic, y'all. I mean, if, you're squeamish at all, it's a gash that goes from his forehead to his mouth. There are 2 wounds on his chest. They are each 4 inches long and about 3 inches apart on the left side of his chest. It looks like he's been hit on the sides of his head with the blunt side of an axe. And the men find 2 pieces of skull and some of Henry's brain on top of his head. And the cabin has been ransacked. I don't see where Franklin had been robbed, but this is major damage. I don't know how close these guys are, close enough to see light peeking through, logs. So I don't know how this happened without these men knowing it. Yeah. Well, of course, with Henry being shot in the forehead, my initial questions, which you probably can't answer. Was there any evidence of distance that the firearm was from this shooting? Is this something that the offender's up close, and so we would see firearms discharge evidence on Henry's forehead?
Yeah.
Or was this from a distance? And in essence, the offender was able to incapacitate and likely kill Henry, but then, did he use the axe on Henry afterwards, or was there a physical altercation prior to the shooting in which an axe was used, and then, in essence, Henry was finished off with a gunshot?
I don't know the answer to that. I am so confused about how that could happen. A gunshot, axe, it sounds like probably Henry was fighting back. I'm not really sure, versus Franklin, who it sounds like just took one shot through his heart and that was it.
Sure.
These men are close enough to be able to see light coming through the cabin. And then I was thinking, how is that possible? Maybe these guys are involved, but with saws and everything else that they're doing, maybe a gunshot was something that was covered up. I don't know. But I don't know if he was axed first and then shot, or the other way around. I didn't read anything about, is it stippling? Is that what it would be? Any kind of burns or anything, like if it was close contact?
Right. The stippling of the gunpowder from the discharge, and that we are talking in the 1860s. So, probably a black powder weapon. I don't think they had the smokeless powder, single shot type of handgun is what I'm envisioning. I think from my perspective, in terms of asking some of these questions, am I dealing with everything happening to Henry within the cabin? Or do I have an offender shooting Henry and the offender is actually outside the cabin? We know the use of the axe on Henry is occurring when the two are, the offender and the victim are close together. Are there any symbols carved into Henry?
Not that I know of, but the way that they are describing those marks, and I can read them to you again, it might have been a cross and they just misread them. They said that there are 2 wounds on his chest. They are 4 inches long and about 3 inches apart on the left side of his chest. So, but I don't see what direction they're in, or if they could have been a cross. I think if it was a clear cross, it would have shown up in the newspaper articles. So, but I don't know, but something is in it. Somebody's carving stuff in these people's chests.
Or these two, these sound like possibly 2 blows from maybe the sharp edge of the axe that are 4 inches apart. They're not crossing over like a cross, and is this just part of an offender, during maybe combat with the victim, or is this, after the victim has been shot, he's down and now, either it's the same, the shooter is the one who's picking up an axe and deciding to, use an axe for whatever reason. But it's interesting. Does 2 weapons being used suggest that two offenders were possibly present?
Yeah. Let me show you something that I think you'll think is interesting. I didn't think I was going to mention this. The men who responded to Franklin, the first victim, the men said that they thought it was a certain kind of gun that had been used, and I just thought it's a revolver, and it doesn't really particularly come into play. But now that you're talking about single shot, let me show you what they thought it was.
Well, I think, that this is where, the year that this happened, or the era that this happened, you suggest a revolver, and it's like, okay, maybe, revolvers were available. And what you're showing me, yep, okay. Now, is this a black powder revolver?
How do I know that?
Yeah, so see how it says this warning: black powder firearms cannot be shipped, et cetera, et cetera. So this sounds like, how, modern guns have ammunition in which there's a cartridge case that has the gunpowder in it, and a primer that the firing pin strikes. And then, of course, the bullet is seated in this cartridge case. So that's where you have a single round of ammunition. And so it's all contained together. Whereas with black powder rifles, black powder revolvers, what you're now seeing, and I am no expert on this at all, but because we didn't deal with black powder guns and modern crime. But the little bit of exposure I've had with it, what I'm envisioning is that the shooter has to load each chamber in the revolver with the black powder, with the round, and kind of tamp it down. So it's a very slow process to reload a gun like this. But this, as opposed to a single shot handgun, the revolver, once he's taken the time to put this black powder ammunition into the revolver, he could shoot however many shots this revolver would hold. I mean, typically modern revolvers are usually 6, but they can vary. So once he's loaded it, he's now got the capability to be able to shoot multiple times with that old black powder revolver.
2.5 pounds. That seems heavy. Is that heavy for a gun?
For 2.5 pounds, no, I would say, for a handgun, it's probably in the ballpark of, a fairly, nowadays you have handguns that are made out of specialized polymers, different alloys that are a little bit lighter. But I couldn't tell you, I've held many different handguns, but in terms of the weight, this is where, I would turn to a firearms examiner and say, hey, tell me about this gun, and then I get educated by an expert.
When we were talking about single shot, I was reminded of a show that I used to watch all the time. I'm slightly obsessed with Sleepy Hollow. I worked at a university in Sleepy Hollow in New York, in North Tarrytown, and I would take the train up there and everything. Okay. And it was part of Fordham University, and I taught there. And so I'm a huge Washington Irving fan, and this TV show came out about Ichabod Crane, the star of Sleepy Hollow. And he is sort of comes back to life, and he's very handsome, and he's interacting with the modern police, and it's very confusing. He has kind of a woman who is working with him trying to solve cases, but he feels like it's the 1700s. And so there's a scene when they're sort of fighting the headless horseman, and she runs ahead and she says, "Unload your gun." And he goes, "Okay." And there's one shot. And she said, "I thought you unloaded your gun." And he said, "I did." And so I always think about that, when I do think about how many bullets do we have to work with here? So anyway, that was a long aside to say that I still wonder why they thought it was the specific one, Colt Navy revolver. But I mean, maybe it was a bullet or something. I don't know. But the people who responded to Franklin's body said, "This is what it looks like to us."
Okay, so you're saying that in Franklin's case, they think it was this .44 black powder revolver.
They just called it the Colt Navy revolver, and that's what I looked up. And all of these popped up, and they look exactly the same. So,
if it was a handgun like this, and these handguns were not tremendously accurate. In fact, I think this is possibly it's not a rifled barrel. The rifling in the barrel puts a twist on the projectile that gives it stability. Mm-hmm. I'm guessing this is not a rifled barrel based on this era. And again, I am no expert, but now in essence, you've got a round coming out of this very inaccurate weapon and striking Franklin in the heart. So I'm surmising that the shooter was reasonably close to Franklin versus Franklin is, on the driving the horses, and he's on the stagecoach, and he gets sniped from a distance from a rifle. Mm-hmm. So it almost sounds like Franklin and the shooter probably were in relatively close proximity before Franklin was shot. That's my guess based off of this type of weapon.
And I wondered about the damage that was done to his forehead, gashes. I mean, this sounds like a total mess of a scene. So, right. I mean, probably they still would have seen the black on him, on his forehead, but still, it's such a mess.
You're talking about with Henry, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm talking about Henry.
Yeah. So with Henry, if he's being hit with the blunt end of an axe, this is a very devastating weapon. It's in essence, that's like being hit in the head with a sledgehammer. Ugh. And so the skull is going to be compromised. And yes, you talked about the description of blood and brain matter being present outside of his skull. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Now that could also be a result of the gunshot. So it just depends on what they're seeing and what the sequence of Henry's injuries were.
Okay, well, let's move forward. So now we're talking about tracking, and I know very little about tracking. But what happens is there's a sheriff. So I always like to figure out who law enforcement is. What are we calling them? Are these constables? No, not in America. The local sheriff and the deputy are tracking Henry's attackers. So it sounds like using the horse tracks. And they follow this trail. This doesn't even seem possible, Paul, from Colorado City to the Ute Pass, which is about 90 miles to the north. And then Canyon City, where the first murder took place, is in between these points. So 90 miles, how would they, I know you probably don't know this, but how would you even differentiate between horses and not which horse prints or which horse hoofs we're going with here?
Yeah. That's where I'm not a tracker.
Now we have to call another expert. So
yes.
Okay, listeners and watchers, we need a gun expert and we need a tracker.
Well, but I think, I've followed, shoe impressions,
mm-hmm.
which let's say an offender running away from a scene and he steps in a garden bed. And so now you have shoe impressions, and then he's running over grass. And then you see him cross over an area where there's dirt and you see the same tread pattern. So I've done that type of thing. That's just typical CSI style, tracking, if you will. Mm-hmm. To track this distance with something that is so nondescript as, horseshoes, it almost tells me that this is whatever path that they're following is not a well-traveled path. Mm-hmm. And they're probably taking a look at what they're interpreting as being the fresh impressions that they can see. Mm-hmm. And then, so they're connecting the dots, because I can guarantee over 90 miles, there's probably long, lengths of this trail in which they don't have anything that they can see. And they mm-hmm. just kind of keep on the same direction that the previous, track showed, and all of a sudden they're picking up the track again. So that's my guess. It's just that how accurate is it? Could they have been misled?
Well, let's continue on. Now we are about 13 days after Franklin, 12 days after Henry. This is March 31st. And now we're in an area called Wilkerson Pass. Have you heard of that?
I have not, no.
Okay. So this is between Colorado City and another gold camp, which is about 50 miles away. And this is a man working at a way station. Do you know what a way station is?
At least within the context of maybe the mining, is that this is where the miners would take what they've recovered and then get a certified weight associated with it. Let's say they've got gold, and now they have somebody that basically is vouching, this person brought to me, so many ounces of this metal or whatever it is.
So this is where my enunciation is failing you, because it's...
So just strike what I just said.
I mean, this is part of my charm, Paul, my accent. So it's
Yep.
way, W-A-Y station. So not wait station, way station, which your explanation makes a lot of sense if it were wait station. This is a rest stop, kind of like a trucker rest stop in a way. So people stop for rest and they get supplies. There is a guy named John Adelman who runs a way station. And this is, again, these places are in the middle of nowhere, literally in the middle of nowhere. And in Wilkerson Pass, and there's a mail carrier who stops at this, way station. When he arrives to Adelman's way station, the mail carrier finds the house to be disordered, is what he says. Quickly, he rides away. It looks like it's been trashed. He doesn't find anything. He just sees that maybe they've been robbed. He finds the sheriff and the deputy who have been tracking Henry and Franklin's attackers. They're connecting these because it doesn't sound like these kind of attacks are common, and it's at two sawmills. Franklin's sawmill and Henry with the cabin. So you've got the sheriff and the deputy covering God knows how many miles, at least 90. And this mail carrier, gosh, what a hard job that must have been in the Colorado territory, being a mail carrier. This mail carrier tracks them down. And he says, this way station is normally very orderly. I don't know where John is. It's been trashed. Can you, come and help? They get to Adelman's and they find his body on the property, not inside the way station. So some reports say that he had been shot through the head. Others say that he was shot twice through the heart. And we don't know about the type of gun. And we don't have a clear connection to the other two men. So to summarize, we've got 3 victims, all men, connected to, this part of the territory, not tremendously far apart. And 2 victims know each other, mostly just in passing. They kind of came in at the same time. It looks like there's been a robbery in this one too. So these are happening close. I mean, this is the 18th of March, the 19th of March, and then the 31st of March. And before you ask, I do not see that he has been hit with an axe, John. And I do not see that there has been anything carved in his chest.
I think, even though, Franklin and Henry had some sort of connection to each other, whereas Adelman, there's no known connection to the 2 previous victims. So I'm wondering at this point if the, Henry and Franklin becoming victims, if even though they knew each other, that relationship was just coincidental. And really they're not being targeted because they knew each other. So if I'm right about that, so now you have with Henry and John Adelman, you now have this, what sounds like the tossing of the inside of the places where, they had control over. Henry's killed inside this cabin, whereas Adelman's body is outside, but the offender took the time to go inside and toss the place. So part of the assessment is are they looking for something? What are they looking for? Are they looking for something that has, monetary value? Are they looking for, like during this era, as you opened up this episode, are they looking for land deeds? So that's, if I'm assessing this crime scene, I want to know, okay, is there something about the locations within these structures that the offender seems to be focused in on, and what would normally be kept at these locations? Is there overlap between these 2 crime scenes, which indicates these offenders are going around looking for something specific? Or are they just, sometimes, I've processed many burglaries early on in my career, and you just have, some of these guys are very focused on what they're going after and target certain areas within a house. Other guys will just start throwing things everywhere, just hoping to run across something. So that's what I'm trying to discern here. Am I dealing with just, somebody who's looking for something random, not knowing what's in the structure? Or is this a targeted type of ransacking within these structures?
And I don't have an impression that this was anything but just tossing and trying to grab anything of value. But I don't know 100% for sure here.
Okay. I
do know that this part of Colorado, the Colorado territory, is remote, all of it. But there are semblances of cities, right? We talked about the plazas where all of these adobe houses are set up and everything. But where the killer is hitting are these remote spots, and spots that are not particularly well traveled. I know this is a way station, but John might not have seen people for days and days and days, depending on how many people are going through this area. So what I am interested in for some reason, and maybe it's me being misguided, is you've got Franklin who was by himself. You've got John at the way station who is by himself. But then you have Henry who has 2 or 3 people not far from him at all there. And so I wonder what the motive is. Is it just, if it's just simply killing people? That just seems risky to me, because these are the people at the middle murder, Henry's murder. These were all relatively young men who could have overpowered whomever ends up being the one who did this. Well,
I think, you saying that there's no information to indicate that the ransacking that's being done has any targeted item that the offender is looking for. And so if the offender is just going into these structures and is taking whatever he or they run across for financial value, that suggests to me that this is possibly somebody that does not have, let's say, a lot of monetary means, and is having to subsist off of whatever he finds during the ransacking. The homicides, I think right now it's kind of hard to say, the cross being put into Franklin. If that was to send a message, then there's to others, then that would seem to think that there's a mission that this offender is on. But if, like your thought, if this was just the offender, for religious purposes, carving the cross into Franklin's body, then now, in essence, you may be dealing with somebody who is just marauding around the countryside, trying to find things of monetary value to be able to continue to subsist, and is willing to kill. These aren't, you're right now, I can't say that there's anything that suggests there's, like a predatory aspect, but it could be, that's where if we have more victims, then maybe it becomes more apparent that you are dealing with offender that is purposely going out to trying to find victims because he wants to kill. He gets some sort of satisfaction. It may be, retaliation against perceived wrongs that these people do, and if you have somebody that's been displaced because of the white settlers, now you could see where there could be what I would consider an anger retaliation type of offender, where he's now angry based on his lifestyle being impacted. And even though these aren't the people that who necessarily, displaced him from a, in-person type of aspect, they're representative of somebody of a group, the white settlers that are, impacting his life. And now he's taking it out on these random white settlers.
Well, unfortunately, we do have more victims to talk about.
I had a feeling it was going that way.
Yeah. The sheriff and the deputy who find John's body ride back down south to Canyon City to report this additional murder. So now they're up to 3. But it looks like the killer or killers went north because there are more bodies. So this is near Fairplay. You know where Fairplay? Have you ever heard that before?
No, I'll look it up just so I can, put it relative to where I'm literally sitting right now, but it's Fairplay.
Fairplay. So we were in 25 miles from Colorado City. So this is far north.
God, it's possible. I've driven through Fairplay.
I think at some point, well, maybe right now, can you comment on the distance? This is a lot. I mean, we're not talking about geographic profiling at this point. They're going, it sounds like at least 90 miles, maybe hundreds of miles on horseback, likely.
Yeah, well, just, taking a car to go from Colorado Springs up to Breckenridge along roughly this route, probably where Fairplay is located at, that's going to be about a 2-hour drive, and it's freeway speeds, but it's, these are windy roads and stuff through the Sometimes it's mountainous, sometimes it's open plains.
Mm-hmm.
So on horseback, this is a pretty significant distance to go, let's say, from the Canyon City area all the way up to Fairplay.
What does that tell you about the offender or offenders? They're obviously comfortable on horseback and going long distances.
Well, I would say, like my experience, of course, is dealing with offenders that are utilizing modern transportation to move around. And, some of this is due to the offender's work, let's say truckers. Other times, offenders, possibly Golden State Killer D'Angelo, purposely moved around just to commit crimes and try to prevent law enforcement from linking crimes together. Mm-hmm. So, there may be an aspect to either one of those scenarios with this offender who's purposely traveling around. Maybe it's work related. Maybe it is purposefully just trying to, move around and kind of stay hidden from sight, if you will, by moving to such, disparate locations to commit crimes. Mm-hmm. So right now I would just say it seems like there's no question that the offender is comfortable moving around, as you mentioned. It's just, why is he moving around? And right now, there's not enough information to try to discern that. And from a geographic profile standpoint, I think what I would be looking at is these paths that the offender is having to take to go from one location to another. Are they what we would consider, primary arterial roads, if you will? And is the offender just following, let's say a known path and is offending along a certain route as he's proceeding north? Or are there anchor points for the offender? Does he have a connection to these locations? Maybe mm-hmm. for work, maybe because he's lived there or he's got family there. And while he's visiting that particular location, he's deciding to go out and offend because he needs more money.
Well, let's find out. We are now on the road to Denver. And we are, as I said, Fairplay, Colorado, about 50 miles north of where all this other stuff had been happening. And this is a campground. So people find two bodies, both men. One is a 23-year-old named Jacob Binkley. The other is a 29-year-old named Abram Shoop. And Shoop becomes important because Shoop becomes important because his brother is a prominent lieutenant, and he will ultimately go on to be the first governor of the state of Idaho and one of its first senators. And so this happened with the Bloody Benders, which we've never talked about. That story I've interviewed a lot of people about, which was a family, I think in Kansas, who murdered a lot of people as they would come by and try to stay at their inn, where they were getting away with it until there is a person who they murder who's related to a very prominent person. And that all hell breaks loose when that happens. So you've got these two men. So you've got Jacob and Abram. Let me tell you what they were doing, and then I'll tell you how they were found. They were driving an ox team together. The bodies are found by an innkeeper who saw their oxen grazing unaccompanied and recognized them because the men had stayed with him the previous trips. And so, they had been regulars at this inn. The weather had been nice the previous night. So it looks like instead of staying at the inn, these guys decided to go ahead and camp. And they are both found at their campground, which is right by a river. Jacob had been shot once through the back, with the bullet becoming lodged at the front of the chest, and is found lying face down on the riverbank right at that campsite. Okay. They don't know what kind of gun is used. Doesn't sound like a shotgun. I mean, does that sound like a revolver? Or, I guess we don't. Can a rifle do that? I guess.
Yeah, right now there's no information to indicate what type of weapon was used. Now, mm-hmm. the bullet, the projectile, penetrated through the victim's body from the back and lodged at the chest. Now, there is a phenomenon that happens where you can have a bullet because as bullets pass through bodies, they lose energy. And sometimes you can have something as simple as a t-shirt. When the bullet comes out and exits out of the body, the fabric of the t-shirt is strong enough to just kind of contain the bullet and keep the bullet sort of at the exit wound. And this is what we called a shored exit. Now, with him being face down on the river bank, what are the questions that I have is, was he shot upright and he collapsed? Or did the offender, after this guy is made to lay prone, you came up and shot him in the back, and now you got the ground, in essence, preventing the bullet from exiting out the chest. And it's also possible that the bullet just lost enough energy as it passed through the upper torso of this victim and never even had the energy to be able to exit out in the first place. And that would tend to suggest that that's a less powerful weapon. So it all depends. Right now, I can't draw any conclusions as to what kind of weapon was used.
My guess would be that he was standing up. And the only reason why is the way that the other murder plays out, which is Abram Shoup. He's found at the bottom of a gulch about 400 yards away. He had been stabbed 3 times in the chest, and his head had been mutilated. I don't know the specifics, but not with a cross. I'm pretty sure carved into it, but it had been mutilated. It appears that he ran before collapsing at the bottom of the gulch, and they had both been robbed. So I don't know if this was everybody lay down and then they're shot, but I mean that Abram's the first one to not be shot. I think he was stabbed. So what does this sound like? And definitely think about the number of offenders at this point. What does this all sound like to you so far?
Well, obviously, with Abram being stabbed 3 times in the chest, it's indicating that the offender is very close. I mean, you are dealing with face-to-face interactions between the offender and Abram. The fact that he's able to run before collapsing, which is something that you see with stabbings. Even if it's a fatal stab wound that's inflicted, it takes time for the bleeding to cause the person to, in essence, lose consciousness, right? And so sometimes you do see stabbing victims, they've received fatal stab wounds, but then they're able to run a distance and then they collapse a distance further down. The head being mutilated, I'm just kind of wondering, and this is where sequencing would come in, is this just possibly in some ways the offender is trying to stab the victim, and now you have incisive injuries and stab wounds to Abram's head as he's warding off the knife attack. And then, of course, there's some stabs to the chest, and Abram is able to get away before he collapses. So I'm not, I don't know what to make about the head mutilation. If the offender is purposely coming up and trying to do something like that, then that sounds like there's a personal aspect to that, between the offender and Abram. Again, you have the use of 2 different weapons. You have Jacob being shot and Abram being stabbed, and they were both robbed. How do you control 2 men? With the gun? Absolutely. Give me your money, and then you get into basically close quarters with Abram with a knife. And now you have Jacob, running away, and you're able, once you've, stabbed, Abram, now you pull out your gun and you shoot, Jacob in the back. I mean, that's a possibility. Or you control these 2 men with 2 offenders. One's armed with a knife and one's armed with a gun.
And these are hardcore pioneer guys. These are all manual laborers. They would put up a fight. I forgot to tell you that these 2 murders happened 50 miles away from the other ones, about 8 days after the last ones, after John at the way station.
Okay.
So these are happening to me so quickly, especially with the distances that, the offender is traveling. So I think, it's clear they've been able to get away with this so far.
Right. And the interesting thing about this is obviously you have a series, it appears, even though back in the day, they don't have DNA to say it's the same person, but there's enough MO characteristics that you say, yeah, you have somebody that's going around killing men and robbing them. It's financially motivated. So, by definition, for some people, you could say this is a serial killer. Mm-hmm. Now this is a very different type of psychology than the fantasy motivated killer at this point in time, based on what you've told me. Now, there may be aspects where this is an offender that really gets off on killing men. But it appears that he's doing this for financial purposes at this point in time. And I'm not convinced it's a single offender at this stage. So it's fascinating from that perspective. And so I'm really curious to see what other cases, are part of this series, and ultimately who is the person responsible.
Well, about 3 weeks later, we have another murder, but this is a first. We have a survivor also.
Oh, we have a witness.
We do.
Okay.
And we will talk about all of that next week, because I did not know until about 5 minutes ago that this would need to be a two-parter, because I just told Alexis, I didn't know you were going to like this case so much, and that's great. I would rather, have to expand it, but we have a lot more to talk about.
It's because I'm babbling so much. It's just
no, because you're into it. I think that's great, because you would think this is so different than what we normally would talk about. But again, look at what we're learning about: ammunition and the motivation. The motivation is what I thought you were really going to be interested in. So we're on the right track for sure.
Nope. And right now, this is very akin to where you have a series of robberies. Maybe not necessarily resulting in homicide, but you do have one offender that's going around and robbing people for financial purposes. And so I would say it's very similar to a modern version of this type of crime.
Well, we will talk about this type of crime next week.
All right. I'm looking forward to it again.